everyone, Sylvia here. Hope you're all well and safe. Because I can't do any face-to-face teaching, I thought I'd make some little online videos to help people who are getting started with watercolours. And I thought I'd focus on materials first, because that's really important. If you don't get the materials right, often you don't have the success you need in watercolour painting. So today we're going to talk purely about paper, and then I'm going to do another few short videos. One will be on paints, one will be on brushes, and then we'll look at accessories as well. So today, let's just talk about paper. So the single most important thing when you're buying paper is weight. And you probably never noticed this before, and to be truthful, I didn't as well until I started painting. I just wanted to demo really. This is just obviously a refill pad, and I just happen to have it from this company. But you'll see that the weight here is 80 grams. So this is paper that we've used for note taking, and as you can see, it's very, very thin. It really wouldn't work if you're using watercolours. It would too much water, it would buckle, it wouldn't come back to flat. It's also the type of paper that you'll probably use in your printer as well. So this sort of weight of paper is no good for watercolour. So let's move that aside for a minute and talk about paper that you do need to be using. So when you're buying watercolour paper, the weight that you want is either 300 grams or 140 pounds. So they give you both in the metric and the imperial weight. Now obviously this is over 3 times the amount of the other one that we've just looked at. So this is quite a nice paper. This has got a little bit creamy, and you can see it's almost, to be honest, watercolour paper is like card. It has that thickness of card, but it tends to have a smooth side and a rough side. So that's what we're looking for. 300 grams weight of paper. So that's your weight. Okay, so let's just talk about other things to do with watercolour paper then. So when you're buying watercolour paper, when you first go out to buy paper, it is quite confusing. There's a lot on the shelves. There's different weights, different brands, different textures, and also different prices and different companies. So it's really, really confusing. So what I want to do today is make it easy for you when you go and buy your paper. So the important thing as well, besides weight, which we've just mentioned, is the texture of paper. So I'm going to talk about that next. So paper comes in 3 different textures. Okay, so let's talk about the first one. So this is HP, or hot pressed paper. This paper essentially has gone through a huge iron, so it's got a really nice, smooth, flat surface. This paper is good for detailed work, and if you want to do a lot of drawing on it, because if you can imagine that if you've got a very smooth surface to draw on, if you draw a line on it, you can have a nice straight line. If you went for a more textured paper and you draw a line, often you get a wiggly line. So it's really good for drawing on the surface. So that's your HP, or hot pressed paper. That's the first one. And take note of the weight again. So this is the one I suggest you go and buy. This is cold pressed, or sometimes you'll see it written as NOT. Now this isn't an acronym. What it means is it's not hot pressed. That's simply what it means. So we're looking at cold pressed or not paper. This paper's got a medium texture. It is slightly rougher than, it's obviously rougher than this one here. And it's starting to get some nice texture in it, so the paint's going to start to granulate and do lovely things on the surface. Now this is really good for most of your watercolour work, and actually what I suggest you use is this one. Now put those aside for a minute. If you really take to watercolours and you become quite accomplished, you might want to start looking at another paper, and this paper is called rough texture. This paper tends to be the most expensive one. It's often handmade by a French company called Arche, or Italian one, Fabriano, you might have heard of. And it's got a super, super texture. It also sometimes comes with this decal edge, which is like a frayed edge on the side of the paper. But that's quite nice, and a lot of artists use that in the work anyway. Super paper. The paint, there's lots of little pockets in it where the paint sits in those pockets and granulates. It looks like granules on the surface. Lots of much deeper indentations, and as you can see, just taking a brush across on this one, I've just brushed it across the surface with the dry brush, and it just attaches to that surface and makes a nice texture and you can actually use that for seascapes and water. This one's got a little bit more, and then as I say, it's obviously flatter on that one. So 3 textures of paper, just concentrate on this one for now. So we've got the weight and we've got the texture. Now I just want to talk a little bit about brands. Now, as I say, I'm not promoting any particular brand. These are brands that I'm used to, that are tried and tested, and are pretty good to work with. So we've already mentioned Langton, and this is De La Rowney's brand. So that's quite popular. The 2 companies that tend to be very popular are De La Rowney and also Winsor & Newton. Winsor & Newton do a really good range of student quality watercolour paints, paper, brushes, and they're called Cotman range. So if you see anything in Cotman, that's a student quality. And when I go on to paints, I'll explain the difference between the student quality and the professional quality. So that's another good brand as well. And then we go on to some other brands, just so you've got some familiarity with the names. This is Bockingford. This is a type of paper that's produced in England. This one's by St Cuthbert Mill. And again, all that detail that you need is on the front. I particularly like this one, the HP one, because it is a really nice smooth surface, and again it's quite creamy, so I quite like that one. My favourite one at the minute, which I use actually for my best work, this was recommended by another artist. This is by a company called Canson, and this particular one is called Moulin de Roy, and it's one of the best papers you can buy because it's made of cotton. So again, you've got all that detail here. Now this, I think, comes in roughly at about £1.60 a sheet. So as I say, you're going to use this for your best work. But the thing I like about this paper is that you can throw a lot of water at it. And with some of my watercolour techniques, I actually do that. Throw a lot of water, a lot of acrylics, and let it all run off and see what happens, because it's really exciting. So this is not a successful painting, but you can see that I've thrown a lot of water at this, and it's actually stayed quite flat still. And I didn't tape this down, it was just pinned. So it's really fabulous paper for lots of water techniques, really. So that's that one. Now, the only other exception to the rule in terms of weight is sometimes when I go out doing watercolour sketches. These are done outdoors, they're often done quickly within less of an hour, and sometimes I don't want to use my most expensive paper for these because it might not always work. So I do actually sometimes use a lower weight paper. So this is just some heavyweight cartridge that I've used, which I took out when we were out at the mine, but it is quite smooth again, and I knew that I'd be able to draw on the top of that. So that's that one. And just a little sketchbook as well. I really like this company. I like their sketchbooks. This one's obviously a low weight of 225, but again, for little sketches, it's fine. I try not to use anything below 150 if I can when I'm outdoors. So a couple of other things about paper you need to know. When you buy paper, generally it is sealed either at one edge or another. It can either be at the top or the other one you've seen at the side. Now sometimes you can buy paper that's sealed and it comes as a block. So it's actually sealed around all 4 edges with the same sort of stuff that you can see on. So it's difficult to see it on there, but it's like a bit of gum. Now the reason some artists like to work on a block is that because it is glued down, generally speaking, you don't get a lot of buckling when you use a lot of water. But then it means you've got to wait for that image to dry, and when it's dried, you have to take a knife and carefully unseal it around all 4 edges. So some artists like that. It's not my preference. I prefer these. And with these, you can either keep them in your pad as a record of what you've done, or you can take them out if you've got a really good image and pop it in a frame. So that's great. So that's those. So there's just 2 other things I want to mention about paper. So please don't throw away your first attempts. I did it in the early days, but please don't do that. Sometimes when you're doing a lot of practice work in watercolour, it is good to look back. So when you look back here, you can see, you can decide whether the paint was the right intensity, did I use enough water, what could I have done differently. But also these make super bits of scrap paper. Because when you're painting, you do a lot of test pieces where you actually check the intensity of your wash. So use them for that. Also, you might have a painting that you've done something where you don't like all of it, but you can cut it out and crop it and you make it into something else. So please save all your bits of paper that you don't have successful paintings on. And that's how we learn, by the way, as well, obviously. So the only other thing I want to mention about paper is in relation to stretching paper. So a lot of people ask about this. It's not a practice I do. I find if I buy the correct weight of paper, it's not necessary. But some artists, some professional artists, like to stretch paper because they get a really flat surface. It's a bit of a faff. You've got to dip it in water, then you've got to put it on a board and then gum tape round. But that's, if you do want to do that, there are lots of online videos to show you how to do that. But it's not something I'm going to address within my series. So yes, and as I say, I think if you get this weight of paper, you'll be okay. So you know what weight of paper. Go for something medium priced. With watercolour paper, you do tend to get what you pay for, so don't go for the cheapest thing. So you need to go for something cold pressed with this medium texture, this kind of weight, and a medium price. And then once you've got your paper, we can go on to the next stage. So I hope that's been informative. If you've got any questions, please drop me a line on my YouTube channel. I'm happy to answer any questions. And thank you for listening today. Look forward to seeing you next time.